here on the East Coast of the United States. We're now literally hours away from the year 2025. Already in some parts of the world, 2025 has already arrived. Many foreign leaders have been making New Year's statements and declarations to their people, some of which we'll be talking about in this show as we go on. But I just want to kind of not simply just kind of wrap up 2024. A lot of people are doing that. I'd rather look forward to 2025. And even though everybody loves to be optimistic on New Year's Day and on New Year's Eve as we head into a new year, we here at Deep Dive want to keep it real. And there are some things that really will concern me heading into the future here on a global scale, not just in one or the other war. And kind of as we come to an end on this year, this will be our final show for 2024, of course. I wanted to show you some 4 areas of concerns that I have, things that we're going to be watching for as we get into the new year, opportunities to make things better if they're done wisely, or traps that could suck us all down if we don't. Unfortunately, that's just the truth of it. That's just how things are. I want to start off, first of all, with the Russia-Ukraine war and things that are going on there. There have been a number of increasing and strident warnings from a number in the West that, the USA is, according to this British foreign policy expert, USA is warned to be prepared for World War III as Putin, quote, plots land grab to reestablish the Soviet Union. This Professor Anthony Glees from the UK says that Putin will turn his strategic plan of reestablishing the USSR and its satellite systems in all but name by turning on the post-1997 NATO states. We're talking about Finland, Sweden, Poland, Czechia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, man, I'm running out of breath here, and Slovenia, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, and West Macedonia. Seriously, he's saying all this stuff. In other words, a really big grab by Putin, so that I am confident that we will oppose him by force and that we will be how World War III will develop. I mean, that's number one. That's just kind of on the surface of it. That's not even fair to say it's hyperbole. It's something like 3 levels above that, because in order for that to happen, the Soviet Union would have to already exist. And listen, I have some experience with this here because I cut my teeth in the Cold War on the border between the East and West, between the Soviet Union / Warsaw Pact and the West / NATO. I was in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry, was in an artillery battalion before that, brigade before that, and was literally patrolling the East-West border. At that time, and this was in the late 1980s, there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 tanks of various kinds on the Soviet side. I think it was over 2 million active duty troops. And of course, all the nations of the Warsaw Pact, many of which are in NATO now, were all allied against us with their militaries were all set out in that course. Of course, thousands upon thousands of missiles, nuclear weapons, lots of Air Force power, lots of naval power, etc. That was a behemoth that could theoretically at any time have decided to roll west, and then all of the Western states would have been at risk. That's not the case now. And listen, you don't have to look very much farther than the course of this war for 3 full years, where Russia has somewhere around 20-21% of Ukraine. As I've been telling you, they've been moving closer and further down the line here, and especially since June of this year. But even that, when you take a look and pan out and look at the map from a European perspective, as a matter of fact, let's actually no, I don't have it handy, and we'll have to do that another time. If you see that, you see that the gains, if you look at them on a map of when you're looking at it from Europe, you can't even see the movements. And for example, Russia recently took the town of Vuhledar. Took them a year and a half to take it. And we're a town, and it's like 40, 50,000 people, relatively small. Of course, it took over a year to take Bakhmut. It's 9 or so months to take Avdiivka. Again, small towns. The city of Pokrovsk still has not even been formally assaulted yet. They're just getting up to the outskirts of it. They've been doing that for most of this year. They've been trying to get up to that, certainly since they took Avdiivka. Chasiv Yar, haven't gotten that all the way yet. Toretsk, still haven't gotten that. It's been many, many, many months. These are, again, all of these are relatively small town, 10, 20, 50, 30,000, actually even less than that for the most part. This whole year, they hadn't been able to take a number of those, and still to this day, they haven't. And now then, Gary, put that one back up there if you could. That list I just had with the list with all the countries there. So this fellow here, and he's far from the only one, and this has not been pushed back on very fair. Look at that huge list of states there. States: Finland, Sweden, Poland, Czechia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Estonia, blah, blah, blah. I just told you that little villages, little towns have not been taken by the Russian military in the full course of this year. And this guy with a straight face, and many like him, want to scare you into thinking that, oh my God, if we don't stop Putin here, then all of those states are going to fall. And that's why he is confident that because we're going to resist him by force, we're going to be in World War III. Now, you can say, okay, that's just some professor somewhere, some hothead doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, the problem is, and you've seen this if you've been watching our show at all this year, there's quite a few in the West that are talking about this, and many of them are names. And unfortunately, there's one that was from earlier this year I'm going to have to expose here, and it's really, really disappointing me because my first job, and I'll just tell you, in Washington, D.C., was in the late 1990s. For a period of time, I was a reserve officer. I wasn't on active duty in the middle of my career. Don't worry about it. It's kind of a long, curious career path that I had. But in the 90s, I had a period where I was on a reserve status. So I was a civilian that would periodically serve. And I got a job as a foreign policy and military advisor for Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. I was from Texas. She was the Texas senator. And I came here to Washington, D.C., and that was my first job. One of the reasons why I took that job so enthusiastically is because she had set herself up as the primary person who was against NATO expansion. And she published lots of op-eds. I actually got to help her with some of those. I think I've mentioned to you before, probably the highlight of my very short career in the Senate was Senate aid, was when I got to go with her onto the Senate floor to debate Joe Biden against NATO expansion. The things that she was saying back then have absolutely turned out to be been the case. The things that she was saying, here's my warnings why we shouldn't do this, have played out. And now then we are where we are in large part because NATO did keep going forward when there was no military necessity to do so. That's where she was back then. But then, like so often happens, success turns you into the blob. And she was later named the NATO ambassador, U.S. ambassador to NATO. And earlier this year, she had this to say.
Putin has told his people, we are going to recreate the Soviet Union. He has told his people that the worst in Russian history that happened was when Gorbachev said that the Soviet republics could become free if they so chose. And that is absolutely his goal, is to recreate the Soviet Union. So that means he will have to go into NATO countries, which means we have a commitment that is inviolate, that will draw us into a war with Russia. And I hope that my colleagues in Congress will see that this is in America's interest, that we help Ukraine with the arms they need to fight for their freedom, because they are doing the fight. We are not. We are helping them with arms. And that is what we should be doing right now, so that our troops will not have to suffer the losses that we have seen in the past.
Golly, I just can't understand why people will say something like that. That it is absolutely Putin's desire to recreate the Soviet Union. Of course, it's not his desire. He has been unambiguous in stating from the beginning of this. And then that comment there that he has stated that the worst disaster in the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. He did say that, but what he didn't say in conjunction was that he wanted to rebuild it. He talked about all the things, the negative things that happened to Russia as a consequence, but it was a very complicated piece. He did not say that he wants to then rebuild all that stuff. And her statement that he told his people that is it's just untrue, just blatantly untrue. That's not what Putin has ever said. And he has been constant, as I've been talking about since 2008, that he said he does not want NATO on his border. He had said that he wanted a cooperative and productive relationship with the West. That's what he did say. That's what he did tell his people, that's what they were seeking and trying to get after, because he recognized whether you love each other or not, you live in the same neighborhood, you got to learn how to get along. Seems kind of common sense, and everybody could have been a win-win off of that, even if you stayed kind of at antagonist. No one ever would have required the U.S. and Russia, or the NATO and Russia, to become best friends or anything like that. But there was absolutely every path to avoid an antagonistic relationship, to where we're even talking about the possibility of a World War III top clash that includes nuclear weapons. And that's one of the other things. It's, it's farcical in that that professor's comment there about all these different states, as though the West would allow one single state to fall without resorting to nuclear weapons, which of course the Russian side knows. And so that's why they're not going to take action that they know will precipitate nuclear weapons back on them, because they don't want it. Just see, even think about the more fundamental thing. What possible value would Russia have to try and, quote, recreate the Soviet Union? Those things, the Soviet Union itself was created under a very set of specific, convoluted and powerful and painful set of historical conditions that led to that. After a bloody revolution, it was many, many years in the process, etc. All those things combined, none of them exist today. None of them exist at all. And so Russia doesn't want to. Russia has no incentive to do so, because it would cost incredible amounts of money, incredible amounts of manpower, and a tremendous amount of blood, both Russian and non-Russian, to even theoretically accomplish that objective. And Putin has no interest in doing so, because the cost would be radically out of proportion to anything they may potentially gain. But because Russia has so many natural resources and so much land right now, there is value in keeping what he's got safe. And that's everything he's about. So you see, it's not an issue of trusting Putin, taking him at his word. Forget about all that. You don't take anything at his word if you don't want to. Just look at his self-interest. Just look at the map, look at the resources that he has, et cetera, and then look at the West, and then just do a cursory level examination of what it would cost him to make good on that threat. And you'll see that no sane person would do that. And whatever you think of Putin, he is anything but a hothead. As a matter of fact, he's very risk averse, as I've talked about in some recent episodes here this month already. His risk averse is probably extending this war beyond what it should have been, had he been willing to take on a little more military risk. That alone should tell you, if he's not willing to take on the risk of even launching a big arrow movement, so to speak, in the war he's fighting right now, how much less would he be willing to launch a war of aggression, just flat out aggression, into the very NATO that he says he wants a buffer between? So as long as you're using your mind, as long as you're being rational and looking at a map, then you can see that these fears are overblown. The problem is, you see, there are leading voices in the West that keep on fanning these flames and putting fuel in it to make it look like, yes, there's a real risk that Putin's coming after us. So, oh my God, we have to keep supporting the Ukraine side. Now, as we now get here shortly into 2025, even in this country, then we have the issue of, here comes President Trump. And we do have this war going on there. And what's going to happen with that? Well, already we've had President Trump's emissary to Ukraine and Russia, General Keith Kellogg, retired general, has already said, here's kind of my plan for what this is, which is basically a delay of NATO. That Ukraine's going to have to give up some territories, and that we want to bring the war to an end, and we're not just going to keep supporting it. That's the gist of it. And then Russia has said, yeah, that's a non-starter for us. In fact, Lavrov a couple of days ago said, yeah, if that's your plan, don't bother wasting any of our time, because we're not going to do that. And in fact, that's exactly what he said. If you can throw that other headline up there, you can see that they've already said that they're going to reject that, what's apparently Trump's Ukraine peace proposal. So that means that now he's going to have to start with something a little bit more challenging, because what seemed like a good plan at the beginning is probably not even, it's stillborn, really, is the bottom line right now. And Russia continues to repeatedly say, until you're willing to look at what is existing on the ground, not just where the current line of contact is, but where the 4 oblasts are, then they said, then there's really no point in talking. I'd say we're willing to, without preconditions, we will talk, but just as long as you understand our minimum side is these 4 oblasts that are coming up, which includes all the territory that Ukraine still owns in those. And so if we don't, then there's going to be the potential for clash. But President Trump himself, at least, does not appear that he's going to press that into the potential starting a clash with Russia, because I think if there's anything President Trump is very clear-eyed on, is that there is no winning if you take a clash against Russia. There's no win whatsoever. any kind of win. It's all possibility or probability of a loss. And Trump is not about, as a businessman, one of the things he's good at is doing a pro and con risk reward analysis. And if he sees that the potential cost outweighs the potential gain, then he says, yep, just write it off and let's roll on to the next thing here. So I think that's what he's going to do there. We just got to be careful that some of these other states who have an incentive to try and push this in a bad direction don't get sway. All right, let's change gears now, and let's go to the next big one here, the things on my radar of concern for 25, and that is China. Now, just hours ago, just before we made this, President Xi Jinping addressed his people, gave them his annual New Year's speech. A lot of it's just kind of boilerplate, but one thing he declared in there was that no one can stop Taiwan unification. He fell short of saying that it's going to happen this year. He didn't put a time on it. He never has. But he continues really consistently to say, this is kind of what we're doing, and there is no stopping it. It will eventually happen. He's actually staked his reputation on that. Earlier this year, there was a new president in Taiwan that was elected. And since that time, there has been 3 separate military exercises done by China around the Taiwan Strait, basically rehearsing a potential invasion or rehearsing a blockade of the island. From what they've done, either of those things becomes very possible. The one that they just completed not a few days ago, I believe, it was the largest that they've ever done in terms of aircraft, personnel that were involved, ships in the sea, et cetera. It was really big. And this has been going on for a while, that the scale has been growing. And so it is not an empty threat that there could be war in the Taiwan Strait. That is a legitimate possibility. So unlike the Russia-Ukraine war, which the potential Russia-NATO war, which I think is ridiculous, and Russia certainly going to start one, I can't say that about the China-Taiwan situation, because they may. Now, my belief is, from studying this for many, many years, is that Xi Jinping would not start a war just haphazardly, because he also is very much risk averse. And as you can see, China hardly ever uses force. They're very, very limited on when they do, and they're very risk averse. So they want to keep especially their economy going, because with 1.4 billion people, you better have a good economy, but otherwise you're going to have a lot of angry Chinese that are going to take to the streets if things don't go well. So he's got to keep his economy good, and just going to war on something like this is going to upset that, because it's going to cause potentially catastrophic global economic implications should they start a war of aggression against Taiwan. That being said, it is a very emotional issue for China, and you can't dismiss the possibility that they may say, all right, we're going to do something it's going to have a near-term problem, but because Chinese, to a large extent, and Russia even to somewhat lesser extent, but still a lot more than us, think long-term. They don't just think about what is going to happen today. It's not a transactional issue, and you can't eliminate the possibility that they'll make that calculation at some point. But then you have to look at, what is the United States going to do? Now, of course, at least 3 separate times during the Biden administration, he expressly said we would defend Taiwan. They walked it back every time, but since he said it once, it was walked back, said it a second time, it was walked back, and then a third time said it again. People had to wonder, wow, is that really what he thought? Or was it just hyperbole? We don't know. Thank goodness. It looks like we're going to get to the end of his term without having to find out. But the question is going to be, what about the incoming Trump administration? Where is he on that? So he's been a little more hawkish on China, and definitely hawkish on the economic front. But he also has been making some conciliatory comments to China about wanting to cooperate and actually wanting to work with China to actually bring peace and stability to large parts of the world. Certainly, we hope that's the case. But you got to know that there are some powerful interests in the United States and in the Western world which are very much against that kind of outcome. They don't want to work with China. They want to work against China. They don't want a peaceful rise. They don't want a cooperative engagement. They want to subordinate China to a superior America. And they are going out of their way to try and box Trump into a position to where he doesn't get to go in the area he may want to. Here, in fact, it was a very recent, actually a couple of days ago, I think it was, with Jack Keane on Fox News. Now, as you watch this commentary on the China issue, note how the anchor phrases the question, and you're going to see an interesting relation to Nazi Germany.
There is a new warning that China may be conducting the largest military buildup since that of the Nazi Germany during the 1930s. Is this in response to Donald Trump's second term, or are we reading too much into this?
No, this has been going on for 10 years. This is not news.
Yeah.
I was on a congressional commission that looked at our national defense strategy, Trump-Mathis, and we identified it then. And that was way back in 2018, and it had been going on for years. This is the most rapid buildup in history that's taken place by the Chinese. And listen, the United States remains the world's #1 military superpower. Why is that? Because we can project power all over the world, and the American people have seen us do that. But here's the catch.
Yeah.
When we get in about 1,000 miles of the Chinese coast, the military advantage swings decisively to China. You name the platform, and they outnumber us, and the quality of their platforms is quickly catching, if not surpassing.
Now, part of what he said there is right, that we do have the preeminent global military power. That is true. That's not hyperbole. That's not arrogance. That's demonstrably true with our ability to project power into a number of places in the world. No one matches that. China doesn't even come close. Russia has virtually none. No power projection, just in small numbers here and there. We literally can go anywhere in the world if we have enough time, because we have the assets to do so. However, that does not translate into having this global ability to project power, meaning that wherever you want to project it to, you have a lot of combat power to defeat nations in their backyard. And that's where one of the things Keene said was correct. And I agree with him there, is that when you get, he said, within about 1,000 nautical miles of the Chinese coast, then the balance shifts over. Because in a regional context, if we get up into their area right there, and you've heard us talk about this many times over this year on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, that China does have significant advantage militarily, strategically, tactically, operationally, in any version you want to look at it, in the Taiwan Strait area. If the United States attempts to go into there, if, for example, if Biden ever made good on that threat, should the war have broken out during his time in office, we would have discovered to our pain just how true what Keene said is, just how true what I'm telling you is. We have simulation after simulation has confirmed this. Study after study has confirmed it. Yes, we have a great Navy. It's really, it's got a lot of power. It can project, but it's also very limited. And when you're talking about like 5,000-6,000 miles transit to get to the battlefield or battlefront in that area, to the skies above, etc., you're very vulnerable to your logistics lines. But then once you get there, you have whatever your basic load is on the ship. So we may have excellent anti-ship missile defenses. They may be really good. But as you've seen, if we've been talking to Ted Postal and just looking at things that happen both in Russia and in the Middle East, nothing is foolproof. Even good ones, stuff eventually gets through. On a ship, folks, you only need almost 1 or 2 missiles to get through, and the ship is going to be on fire, knocked out of service, or possibly even sunk. And what the Chinese have done is they are very aware of this, and so they have put a premium on anti-ship missiles, on the production of it. Apparently, they have massive numbers of them, and I've heard by one account 8 separate factories that crank these things out. There may be more, but from one expert that I talked to, they said there's at least 8 factories that produce these kinds of missiles. So they recognize that, okay, you may have great air defenses, but we're going to saturate it so you can't get them all down. And then, and this is one of the biggest vulnerabilities, once you've shot all of your air defense counter missiles, you're vulnerable. You're dead in the water. So I'll just pick a number. Let's say you had 200 counter air missiles, anti-air defense missiles, interceptors. Now you've used them up because China's been attacking. They send all these missiles. You shoot them up. Every single one of them knocks down the Chinese missile. None of them got through. Yay, it's wonderful. But what happens on that 201st missile? You've now fired all of yours. It takes weeks to get these things replaced, and it's not something you can just bring another ship up there and transload it over. I'm told by many naval experts that you actually have to go to a port somewhere and have them transport it on with the heavy equipment. So now then, from that point forward, if China has produced enough missiles, they can just like saturate and suck down all of your interceptors. And then all of a sudden, every ship in the water is vulnerable to being sunk, folks. I mean, literally every single one of them. Once your Aegis, any ship capabilities run out, then you're vulnerable. So anything that floats, and that even means an aircraft carrier, which is why in a lot of these simulations that have been done over the last several years talk about how we could lose 2 to 3 aircraft carriers and their associated ships for that very reason. That doesn't even count the subservice, which Keane went on to talk about there at the moment is still one of our advantages, but it's a relative advantage now, and the China's catching up really quick. But when you put all that together, there's no way we can, and we definitely, therefore, should never do that. We should never fight a war against China over Taiwan, period. So that's where Keane is actually wrong in what he says there, because his implications are that we need to build up the military. And in fact, Mitch McConnell, in a piece in Foreign Affairs about a month ago, he just flat out said, and it came out last month actually, but it's dated for January, February of 25 here. But he calls it the price of American retreat. And of course, that's an antagonistic headline that's going to get a lot of clicks because people are going, man, yeah, we can't be retreating. We're tough. We're Americans. We have to go forward all the time, et cetera. And so when you read down what he defines as retreat, it's anyone who doesn't advocate a militaristic, in-your-face foreign policy. That's how he calls retreat. And so how does he want to defend this? One of the key things in this article here was a focus on China. He said that is our biggest pacing threat. It's the most important threat that we could face. And so what do we need to do about it? What we need is more cash, folks. We need more money for the Defense Department, more money for the military industrial complex. And in fact, one of the quotes he uses in there is that $900 billion, which is roughly what the current one is, and the projected one for 25 is, quote, not near enough. So, yeah, no thought by these people, whether it's Keane, whether it's Mitch McConnell. I'm sure there's plenty of leaders in the Democratic Party in both chambers, both parties. All they want to do is get more cash for the Defense Department. No thought whatsoever given to change your damn policies. Do something that makes sense. Do something that secures America's national security and economic prosperity at the lowest possible cost. It's not hard, folks. It truly isn't. See, this mentality that we've had hardwired into our minds, especially since 9/11, that everybody's always out to get us. And oh my God, if we don't do X, Y, Z everywhere all the time, they're all coming to get us. Here's the actual truth. These policies cause people to be afraid of us all over the place. And when people are afraid, they take countermeasures. And then that raises the prospect that we may actually clash with them, not because they were ever out to get us, but because they're concerned about how often we use military force. And they're thinking, damn, the only thing we got to do is we better arm ourselves up to defend against this American threat that's coming across all the way. Now, listen, I know that makes a lot of Americans uncomfortable. Some of it makes them really angry to hear comments like this. Don't care. I don't care if that makes you mad or not, because those kinds of people thinking that way are the ones that are going to get us dragged into a World War III or any major conflict that we should never have to fight. There is no reason we should ever have a war with China, or especially over Taiwan. If we get a Pearl Harbor kind of deal to where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, for no reason, China attacks us somewhere, totally different ballgame. And now I'll be the first in line to say we are going to take countermeasures and we are going to rectify this situation. And that simultaneously, always, is that I'm a big advocate of a strong national defense. We need to have a military that is well-funded, well-trained, filled with the right kind of people that get the level of training and experience in all the different ways. We have a proper level of funding to make sure that whatever we have in our foreign policy and our ability to defend ourselves is significant, so that there will be a profound cost of anyone to try and cross us and attack us without cause. But that also means that you have to have a smart foreign policy. You have to say, I'm not going to go looking for enemies. I'm not going to try to turn China into an enemy and try to get ready to fight a war with them in their backyard when I don't need to. all these talk about like freedom of navigation operations and all this kind of stuff that we constantly do, where we sail ships through the Taiwan Strait or into the South China Seas, etc. No one ever asked the obvious question: is China trying to block freedom of navigation? Are they preventing anyone from going into these areas? No, they're not. No one is challenging the freedom of navigation. China needs the freedom of navigation. They need the sea lanes open. That's how their economy functions in a global context. To get their products out, to get other products in, they have to have the commons open. They have even more incentive to keep those things open than we do, because their economy is so dependent upon the two-way trade, much of which goes over the oceans. So when we keep sending warships into those areas, into their front yard, so to speak, especially when it goes through the Taiwan Straits, all that does is provoke and to make them fear us even more, and to then take preparation actions. And what Jack Keane said there is fundamentally true in the first part, that they are on a huge military buildup and have been for not just 10 years, but probably for well over 20 years, if you look back at it. Significant, I'm talking about, all the way through, and they are getting much more capable. So we don't need to test that out. And so there should never be a war. I'll just flat out categorically say, short of some unbelievable situation where China attacks the United States directly, initially, there is no reason for us to go to war with China. And that means, and I'll say this, I'll be very clear on this, if China takes action against Taiwan, that should not result in a war between the United States and China. There's many diplomatic things that we can do. There's many economic things that we can do. We can protest. We can have cause pain in other areas, et cetera, to try to make sure that this doesn't go any further. But folks, if they decide to take that action there, which would essentially be the culmination of the 1949 Civil War that China fought, because that's where the two sides came from, that's something that they're going to have to deal with. And as bad as it would be on a human level, as bad as it would be to see, Taiwanese, I'm sure that they would be begging for help. There's no doubt they would. I would, if I was in that situation, if I was a Taiwanese, if I was on there, I don't mind, honestly, I would. But as an American, I wouldn't answer that call, because all that's going to do is to get all of our national security capabilities, our ships, our planes, our troops, our money, everything is going to get sent into a dark hole at the bottom of the South China Seas, or at the bottom of the Taiwan Straits. And at the end of the day, it will not stop China. Let me just make sure that you're crystal clear on this point. There is no chance in hell, none, that China would be thwarted in an initial attempt to take Taiwan, that we would prevent them from doing so, and then that would be the end of the show. That would only be, okay, if they exhausted all their potential, then they would start to rebuild it until then they could reinitiate again, or that they would continue going on. There is no possibility on God's earth that Chinese are going to allow U.S. military to have a front line militaristically across the Taiwan Straits any more than we would allow China to be on, say, Cuba. Now, if you want to make the argument that China or Russia can have a military presence on Cuba, 90 or so miles off the U.S. coast, then you can have the other conversation. But if you will have the exact same reaction that I do about hell no, that's not going to be allowed, then you have to understand that the same logic applies over there. And look, we almost had a nuclear war when Russia tried to have nuclear missiles on Cuba. It wouldn't be any different if it's the opposite direction of us having military forces on Taiwan. And it wouldn't be any difference, in the modern era if someone tried to do that to us. So let's just don't do something that would be stupid at face value. Let's do something that makes sense. Let's make sure we protect our ability to defend ourselves, even if China and Taiwan eventually get into it. Because just understand there that if we're stupid, if we're not smart, like I just told you to be, then that means that our national security capacity will be crushed in that entire area of the world. And what are you going to do now? You know how long it takes to rebuild a fleet? Decades, plural. And that assumes that we would even have the money to have such a gargantuan outlay of capital ships, et cetera. It would be tremendous. And that means all of our security everywhere else would now be at much higher risk. Do you want to risk your security everywhere else there are American assets, to include our own homeland, by trying to defend Taiwan? My answer is unequivocally no. Let's hope that President Trump says the same. Next, I want to look at staying in that same part of the world, North Korea. There has been some news coming out here. Actually, I think this is from today's news, that Kim Jong-un is going to take a more confrontational approach to Trump this time than he did the first time. And he's talking about the toughest and aggressive anti-U.S. policy before Trump's return. He had a pretty fiery speech of his own, I believe, in North Korea earlier today. And so we have to say, where is this one going to go? Now, a couple of things. I'm going to go back again to Jack Keane just because he's made some comments on this recently. But I just want to point out, I used some of these comments here from folks like Keane and Ben Hodges in the past, et cetera, because what these guys say represent what a lot of them, I guess the so-called, anyway, foreign policy elite in the United States think. A lot of them take their clues based on the public statements that Keynes makes like this. I want to look at a couple of things he's said recently about North Korea. And the first one is that we have to be antagonistic against North Korea because they are a major threat to Ukraine.
So we have two powers aligned together to defeat Ukraine, an independent country. And that is that is the most significant escalation of the war, not a weapon system, another country fighting side by side with Russia. And not only that, but they provide them with significant ballistic missiles, significant artillery ammunition, and artillery weapons themselves. So they are a major aid to Russia in its attempt to try to defeat Ukraine.
But what he didn't say there, or even in the next clip that I'm going to show you, is, okay, and what are you going to do about it? So let's take a look at that part there. Why is North Korea helping out Russia? Now, there's been a lot of very conflicting information about North Korean troops fighting in the Ukraine war against Ukraine. Lots of claims and even a couple of photographs here, but it's far from clear that there's actually a field army, a North Korean field army in the field against Ukraine. But even if there were, even according to Zelensky, the biggest number that anyone has ever floated was 12,000. But we've literally seen like individual North Korean soldiers here and there that were identified as such anyway by the by the Ukrainian folks. The Russian side says, no, they're not there. They're doing other things in the country. They've been training here for a long time. But apparently some of the special forces may be actually engaged. It's unclear on what's going on. But no matter what, no matter which version you want to look at, even if you completely agree with the Ukrainian version, it's a small number. There are, apparently, as of today, there is somewhere around according to the Ukraine side, by the way, somewhere around 700,000 Russian soldiers inside Ukraine that are fighting in the war. 700,000. Now, if you've got 700,000 of your own, and as you go back and look at an episode we just made here about how Russia's military is continuing to grow at the pace of around 30,000 per month, why would they need to bring in a third of that from North Korea? Where's the benefit to Russia from doing that? There's no benefit to Russia. There's not. In fact, it's a headache to Russia. That's a small number. It's not going to have any decisive effect, even at the tactical level, because Russia has hundreds of thousands of their own troops that they can use. They don't need a very small number on a theater level of North Koreans. Then, of course, you also have the difficulties of experience level, and obviously the command and control, the communication lists. That's all headaches for the Russian side. There's no real benefit for that. This nonsense that you've heard about, this shows how weak Russia is because they have to have North Korea. That's nonsense. And again, if you're just looking at it realistically, looking at the numbers, you can see for all the reasons I just laid out here, it's a headache for the Russians, and they gain like this much. North Korea, on the other hand, potentially stands to gain a lot if it's true that there's troops on the ground there, or if even them training somewhere with other combat veterans from Russia, they gain a lot. And because of the cooperation between the two has increased, that makes sense. Now, that is something that's rational that North Korea would request. Look, I need to get some of my guys bloody. We hadn't fought any battles in decades. We need to have some fresh combat experience so that we can spread it throughout our force when they come back. That's what makes sense. We don't have a lot of information on that either, but at least that's plausible. But let's take a look at even the bigger situation. Why is Russia and North Korea working together at all? Were they before this war started? So we often talk about, and Keene implies here that we need to condemn Russia and Ukraine, or Russia and North Korea for having this cooperation between the two. But what have we been doing with Ukraine? You know how often we brag about how 50 nations, all of Western Europe, plus other countries from other parts of the world, 50 nations working together with Ukraine against Russia. So we have huge numbers of foreign help for the Ukraine side, to include even our own American and British and French weapon systems that fire into Russia, some of which have some U.S. cooperation and help physically in doing that. Now, if we're doing that and bragging about it, what possible incentive and motivation would Russia have not to do the same? And what sense does it make to point a bony finger of condemnation at Russia when they're going, dude, seriously? There's like two, North Korea and Iran. And of course, I'll talk about Iran in just a minute here. But you see, that's the other thing that you can add China in there, because they have also been using a lot of dual use capabilities and technologies, and lots of kind of under the table help to Russia as well. Lots of reports are out on that. But because of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, they have been militarily working together. And none of that happened before we supported the Russia-Ukraine war. Had we had a negotiated settlement with that, and it just said, hey, all right, both of y'all do the Minsk Accords, okay? Just quit talking about a lot of this stuff. A lot of it was going on over the line of contact that had been, the civil war that had been raging in the eastern part of Ukraine since 2014. Y'all stop what you're doing there. Let's implement the peace accords, what's already been agreed to. Both sides implement. Let's put pressure on both sides to implement it, and this go. There wouldn't have been a war. There wouldn't have been a war. It's almost certain that there wouldn't have been a war. There would have been no reason for Russia to have a war at that time. Had we then said, okay, there should have been one, but one did break out. Okay, then Istanbul, April 2022. We have the general outlines of an agreement had been agreed to by both sides after that meeting. But then, of course, we know it got sabotaged after that. Had we agreed then and said, all right, well, this was dumb, hurt Russia, they cost them a lot. They've lost thousands of combat vehicles already, tens of thousands of troops. Let's get this thing off the table now, and then shore up our, Ukraine under the deal that they could have gotten in, which was actually quite good in comparison to what they're going to end up with here, et cetera. Then that time, North Korea wasn't involved with Russia. Iran wasn't involved with Russia. China and Russia, they had this, I think they call it like a no holds barred friendship, but it hadn't expanded to the level that it is right now. Now, they've been friends for a long time because we're trying to have a counterweight to the United States and BRICS and all that stuff on the economic front. So that would have continued on too. But the four of them together, and by the way, they have since done some military operations and training exercises together, et cetera. All that is the direct result of our 50-nation support for Ukraine against Russia, and this just methodical support, no matter how bad the war is going. There are consequences to our actions. So if we want to see that reversed and flip around, then we need to go start doing something different. But you have a lot of these folks that don't want to do something different. Interesting things, because now then you have to wonder, from what Keene has said there on Fox News, what is Trump going to do? Trump's going to come in now. If they had the issue that they did in 2019 during his first term, when, by the way, just as a bit of setup here, in 2019, Trump went to Vietnam and to Hanoi, to where it looked like they were about ready to make another deal. It wasn't going to be a big one, but it was going to be another positive step in the direction. Ostensibly, on the surface, both sides were saying we were moving towards denuclearization, but everybody knew that was never going to happen. That North Korea had nuclear weapons for to assure their own national security, their own self-defense, so they didn't have to rely on anybody else. And it was never realistic to think they were actually going to get rid of them. But what you could do is freeze the program. You could push things out indefinitely into the future to where it wouldn't be antagonistic, so they wouldn't feel the need to keep going down that direction. And you could have limited a lot of things. Had they made that deal that was on the table in 2019, in February 2019, then goodness only knows how much better things could have been today. But instead, Trump was allowed by John Bolton, who was in the National Security Advisor, to talk him out of even the one step, and instead basically tear up everything that he had accomplished in the first part of his tenure here. And now then, when Jack King was on Fox News, also asked about this part here, watch how he changes history and says something different about what happened in 2019.
Well, it ended in 2019 when President Trump walked out of the negotiations that were taking place in Hanoi. And then it was as a result of those negotiations that the Trump administration realized that Kim Jong-un was all talk. He was not going to walk away from his nuclear program. And as a result of that, we pretty much broke off any thought that some nuclear deal was going to be made.
So what then, General? What do you think then? Now, if we, quote, walked away because no nuclear deal was going to be made, which everyone knew it wasn't, no one was, I mean, unless you think Trump was stupid and didn't have any idea what was going on at all, and I don't, he knew what was at stake. He knew what Kim Jong-un had, and he knew where he was going to go. But he also knew correctly that if we kept going down that path, then it could have continued. It would have taken the risk of any nuclear escalation and use lower and lower and lower. But it could have put it into a mothball type situation. Look, once they cross that nuclear threshold, let's make sure that everybody's clear on this. They're never going back. What country on the face of the planet would say, I have a nuclear weapon that I can ensure my own defense by having a deterrent against anyone who might attack me? I've got the nuclear option that I can take it, is going to say, but you know what? If you promise me nothing will ever happen, sure, here's my nuclear bomb. No one's going to do that. And if anyone thought about doing it, all they got to do is look a few years before that, when Muammar Gaddafi was in a not quite the same place. He had a nuclear weapons program, but it didn't have a nuclear weapon. He had a program, but it was not there yet. And so he agreed to mothball his program in cooperation with the United States. And so he handed over all kinds of fissile material and whatever and did his part. And then once that was taken care of, then all of a sudden, it wasn't long before Obama then went back on everything and supported with American air power a bunch of other Western nations that effectively overthrew him, drew him from power, and then saw him brutally murdered on the streets. And of course, we don't have to talk about that situation right now. It's been really bad for Libya ever since then, but that's what happened here. So that was a shot across about every nation on the planet. No one will ever willingly give up a nuclear weapon and trust anything that the West says when they saw that brutally dictator slaughtered on the streets like an animal. No one will never do that again. And so no one should ever think Kim Jong-un's going to do that. What we can do, though, is to lower the temperature, to lower the reason why he should feel threatened, and to have our own nuclear deterrent, which we already have. That has kept the peace with all nuclear powers since 48, I think it was 47, when the Soviet Union first tested their first nuclear missile. And it wasn't just our own nuclear warheads, and other countries did too. So since that time, nuclear deterrence has held across the board. That can continue to, as long as we don't get stupid. Okay, last area I want to look at here is the Iran-Israel situation, because that's another thorny issue that Trump's going to have to navigate and try to figure out what he's going to do. Benjamin Netanyahu is in an interesting place because he has been talking more and more openly, and you can see his eyes are getting big on Iran because of the success they had over Hamas, over Hezbollah, over the continuing to diminish but not defeat the Houthis, and then, of course, the most spectacularly in the destruction of the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. Now, since that time, he has been looking more and more, wild-eyed at Iran, because as we've had the comment here from former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where he said, listen, this is a once in a 50-year shot here. Let's just get rid of the head of the octopus, which he calls Iran, now while we still can. And so now then you've got Netanyahu looking around and seeing all of these, what was this circle of fire or axis of resistance, whatever you want to call it, that was all these different tentacles that Iran had. They've all been eviscerated, if not destroyed, severely damaged. Now, Iran, I'll just tell you, in all truth and reality, was never as strong as what anybody said. They were always a bit regional player. They never threatened the United States anything beyond what we could handle with our normal security. We didn't need anything special. We definitely don't need any troops on the ground in the area, which only serve as a point of strategic vulnerability, which I've told you many times. So that's not anybody else we should ever think about going to war with, because there is zero upside and there is a bucket load of downside potential should we ever to do so. Unfortunately, we've kind of tied ourselves with Netanyahu, who was also warned about, don't go too far in these other directions. And he did. And at least tactically, and I'll concede this, militarily, they were more successful than I thought that they would be at this point here. But those are also temporary gains. The general dynamics still exist just as much as they did before. Israel is still a relatively limited conventional military power. These others are severely weakened. They're not destroyed. They will come back. They will rebuild, etc. And so for Netanyahu to say, okay, probably recognizing the same thing, they'll come back at some point in the future. So this is our shot right now, while everybody else is weak, to go after Iran and knock them out. But they can't do it on their own. And of course, as I argue, they can't do it with us either, because the task is so monumental. We don't have the force structure to do it. We don't have the manpower. We definitely don't have the ammunition. And Iran, if they get pushed into a corner, could unleash a lot of harm on us. Even if they can't defeat us in a war, they can inflict severe pain and harm in shipping and in these missiles, et cetera. A lot of things that they can do, but they would only do them if they're literally shoved into an existential corner. Of course, at the heart of that is they may say, because of all this stuff and this threat I've got here, we're going to do what we have refused to do so long, and that is go finally on a nuclear weapons program. Now, we know that they're a lot closer than they ever were. According to many of the experts, they're within a 2-week period, should they make the decision, to where they can have enough fissile material for a number of bombs in another couple of months before they can get it weaponized and to a deliverable missile system, which they already have. A lot of technical things to go through there, but nothing that's insurmountable. We have claimed all the time, Trump said it 100 times, that our objective were to prevent Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon. Well, there are ways that will help that, and there are ways that will hurt that. What we've been doing is ways that hurt it and have driven them into the point to where they feel that may be the only outcome that they have, instead of saying, hey, look, as long as you guys don't do anything dumb and attack us, then we're not going to mess with you either. And so now then they don't have a need to go to a nuclear weapons program. But if we continue going forward, then I fear we're going to get to that point. And as that headline that Gary had up there a second ago, there's more and more voices in the West that go, yeah, we need a regime change. We need a regime change war here. As much as we don't like it, that's where we should go. But look, folks, changing the regime, number one, is incredibly difficult. It's not like there's one guy, the Ayatollah, you have to knock out. There's a whole senior cadre of folks. And I know that the allure is, yeah, but if we knock out enough of these guys, then there will be an internal revolt and magically something beautiful will happen in the West. Come on. I mean, we played this so many times. It almost never happens that way. And even on the few times that it has, like when we literally deposed the Shah, or deposed the guy, Mossadegh, and put our guy in there of the Shah, that just worked for a little bit of time. And then it turned into disaster, which directly led to the rise of the Ayatollah Khomeini. So you see that even when you have a temporary success, when you keep trying to meddle with regime change stuff, it never works out in your favor. And so it certainly won't here either. But we had, and I won't play the clip right now, but we had General Kellogg shortly after the Iranians responded after the second Israeli provocation when they assassinated a member of the Hamas inside the Tehran, the capital, during an inauguration. They eventually launched some missiles for the second time this year into Israel. And Kellogg went on TV then on Trump's team and said, yeah, I think we got to take out Iran. I think this is the moment that we need to take out the supreme leader and their IRGC. Same thing. Then here we've got Keane again, who's providing all this expert commentary for what the elite think. Here's how he put it.
President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in conjunction with the Arabs, issue a written ultimatum to the supreme leader. And number one, tell them, dismantle your nuclear enterprise, verified, and by a date certain, and verified by IAEA inspectors, regional inspectors, and U.S. inspectors. Cease and desist from supporting, your proxies and tell them to cease attacks, period. In the same ultimatum letter, tell them what the alternative is. Sanctions much greater than what the Trump administration did during their first term. We would have sanctions in place with the goal to bankrupt your economy. Secondly, we will conduct surgical attacks to cripple your nuclear enterprise and reduce your rocket and missile arsenal. There are other options you can do. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, to be frank, would rather not try to even go with the voluntary dismantling and would prefer to do something kinetically to take down a nuclear enterprise and rockets and missiles. You could go with another option, do the sanctions first, and use that as leverage to get him to dismantle his enterprise. We have an opportunity to neutralize this country once and for all.
That is the core issue there that we have. That's one of our biggest, possibly even potentially in the future, fatal mindsets. We'll solve this once and for all with military power, oblivious to this wreckage that's behind us over the last 3 decades at least of attempts to do this. And you can go back even a little bit further into Vietnam. So many things that we have tried to do have just been catastrophic failures. I mean, Somalia. We're still in Somalia since the President Clinton, for crying out loud, took us there in the first place. Nothing was ever solved. We still have troops there to this day. Many places in Africa, towards no end. How many coups have you seen in Africa that were actually conducted by people that we trained? Democracy in action? Yeah, that's not. How's that working out for you? And obviously Iraq. We went from Saddam Hussein, who was a dictator that we hated, who did in fact gas some of his people, terrible actor. But the country was a bulwark against Iran, and it was a regional balance along with several others that kept Iran on the significant downside. What happened after we went in and took Saddam Hussein out? Aside from losing thousands of American soldiers and hundreds of thousands with traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, et cetera, now then there's a pro-Shia government involved in power in Baghdad that's very friendly. And in fact, some of their security forces are actually from Iranian-backed people. How's that for success? Great job on that, fellas. Wonderful that you took out the balance and the counterweight to Iran and now helped out Iran. And of course, Afghanistan. We spent 20 years, again, thousands of Americans, tens of thousands wounded, PTSD, all that stuff. However many trillions of dollars, $6 trillion, I think, between the two wars. And we replaced the Taliban with the Taliban. How's that worked out for you? Oh, okay. Well, that one didn't work out. So none of them work out. And yet that never seems to inform people like Jack Keenan, all of those of the same generation, all of those of that ilk that keep saying the same things over and over. And now then they're building up the masterpiece of all wreckage in the Ukraine. That country is going to be devastated when this thing is over. Beyond imagination, just crushed, literally, physically in many areas. Generations of her men have been destroyed, wiped off the face of the planet. And those who survive are going to be so messed up for so long because of the extensive amount of time that they have been under fire. There'll be stories coming about that for decades, folks. And these are like time bombs inside Ukraine. No fault of their own. That's just how the psyche of a man is when it's subjected to that kind of trauma for so long. You can't help it. But we don't care about any of that stuff. But I'm telling you, in the future, they will look back and say, what was wrong with this generation? What is wrong with these people that they couldn't see patently obvious ground truth in front of them and make the just basic normal decisions instead of continuing to say stuff like I played on this show here? 2025 doesn't need to have any wars at all. We can get this one off the table, and it's within weeks, possibly, depending on how willing Trump is to make, hard negotiated settlements. And when by that I mean hard in terms of having terms that are bad for Ukraine, bad for the Ukrainian government, good for the Ukrainian people, but that will get the war over quickly, as opposed to trying hard to win incremental things here and there and expanding the loss. That's where that would be. But he can get it done. We don't have to go to war with China. We should never go to war with China. We don't have to get antagonistic with North Korea and push them in the direction of having even more nuclear weapons. We definitely don't have to make things even worse in the Middle East. Trump should under no circumstances either greenlight or support, much less participate in an attack on Iran. We don't need to do that. They are already severely weakened from where the weak place they already were at the beginning. Our national security is not at stake. All of those things can just go down. Temperature can drop down to 2025. It's in our power to do. It's in our interest to do. And it would be such a benefit to the whole region, all these regions, and certainly the world, but most assuredly American national security and American economic prosperity. So we don't have to keep wasting all this money on losing ventures that only make things worse. That's what we can do. What I fear the chances are high, though, is that one or multiple of these things blows up in our face. And once that happens, once war breaks out of its containment field, all kinds of bad things can happen. And people think that, yeah, we can keep on. I mean, we've done it for nearly 3 years here in the Russia-Ukraine war. We've kept it prevented inside of there. We've made some money here and there. Cool for the Defense Department and the defense industry. Horrible for the people on the ground. But yeah, we can keep it going. And you think that, yeah, I'm smart enough to keep this going, until you aren't, until something bad happens, until it does, whether through error, miscalculation, or just bad decision. All of a sudden things break out. And that is inevitably, for thousands of years of human history, wars have done that unintentionally. People thought World War I is a great example. If you study the outbreak of that, most of the people thought that it would be a small confrontation. They thought it would be just a little thing, Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, maybe a little bit on the side here, but it would be small. Whatever happened, even when they saw it was going to be large, it would still be short, sharp, and over, like most of them had been before. They all thought they knew how to control it. And you saw what happened. And then you saw what happened in World War II, where the killing just a quarter century later went even higher. I think triple the number of people dead worldwide. And obviously the inauguration of nuclear weapons, etc. Things can expand beyond your ability to control. And we have been lucky so far that we have been able to ride this crest. And some of these mistakes, disasters I've talked about have been, well, you can't really contain them, but they've been relatively small regionally in their impact. So that hasn't caused that much damage. But folks, we're rolling the dice on a gamble table that like a gambling addict who can't see straight and risks everything. If we think on all these areas, we can keeping the violence going and we stay safe. That is a bad, bad gamble. And I pray that people like Tulsi Gabbard, who are in Trump's inner circle, and a number of other people too, can help him see what the cost is of going down certain paths here, so that we don't get into some of these worse outcomes. I hope and I pray that 1 year from now, we're doing the end of 2025 and we can look back and we can say, whew, we dodged all those bullets, and now there's going to be 2026 has even got better opportunities ahead, etc. That's where I hope we are. We can be there. But God only knows where it's going to end up happening, and we'll bring it to you live as it does. So thank you very much for your day today. I hope if you're here in the U.S. that you enjoy your New Year's Eve tonight, and just understand that we'll stay with you as every time as breaking news happens and these issues and all these different areas keep happening. We're going to bring you all the analysis so that you know what you need, because we are unintimidated and unafraid, and we will bring you the truth no matter what it is all the time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next year on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.